And welcome to the May 30th edition of the Bubb Report. This week, the issue of contract labor takes center stage on the program. Trade union organizations in Grenada, who represent public sector workers, have been sounding the alarm for many years about the pitfalls and challenges of hiring contract workers on the island by both government and the private sector. They believe that contract workers across all sectors are in some cases underpaid and exploited and not given the benefit of long-term economic security. On the other hand, some in the private sector view contract labor as a cost-effective way of keeping overheads low and having enough cash flow to at least employ as much people as possible in a country where the unemployment rate hovers around 24 to 25%. Also on the report, we speak with Susan Maines about Grenada's historic participation at the 17th International Architecture Exhibition of La Biennale in Venice, Italy. Grenada's representation at the festival reimagines architectural possibilities for the future of the town of St. George to include a walkable green and open space on the Carenage. Later in our program, we speak with two principals about the postponement of both the annual CXC and CAPE exams in 2021, which are now scheduled to begin on June 28th. Sir Hilary Beckles, who chairs the regional CXC body, made the point that the decision to delay the exams were the result of the ongoing public health state of emergency in Trinidad and Tobago, as well as the fallout from the eruption at the La Soufrière volcano in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. We welcome our guests, Dominic Jeremiah, President of the Grenada Association of Secondary Schools, Brian Grimes, President of the Grenada Public Workers Union, Senator Chris Diali, the business representative in the Grenada Senate, Curtis Graves of the St. Vincent and the Grenadines Association of Principals of Secondary Schools, and Dr. Susan Maines, artist and curator. We thank you for joining us. A pleasant good morning to all our viewers and listeners of the Bubb Report. Welcome to a new week and welcome to new possibilities. Of course, I was on hiatus last week and I'm happy to be back in the hosting chair for another series of Bubb Report programming. But of course, before we begin, I think it would be important for me to address the publication of what I deem as two disturbing opinion articles that appeared in both the New Today newspaper and the Grenada Informer, respectively, over the past 3 weeks. The first article, written as if it were actual factual news, employed in what I view as salacious rhetoric to demonize and malign a young woman allegedly from Guelph, while the second article, which made the front page of the Grenada Informer, used a similarly constructed rhetoric about another young woman allegedly from the south of the island. Of course, some media workers in Grenada, rightly so, bemoaned the threats to press freedom on the island. I propose that great freedom of the press also comes with great responsibility. Newspaper editors, you have a responsibility to ensure that you are not using your bully pulpits to further coarsen Grenadian society, which, in my view, has become very polarized, where sometimes gossip, old talk, and scandal are used as weapons against private citizens. Newspapers, therefore, ought not to be used as avenues for settling personal scores between citizens who might have private beef. This is not newsworthy. I believe, therefore, it would be instructive for us to revisit the definition of news, newsworthiness, and the function of the newspaper editor as the gatekeeper of news, and the role of media in helping to advance society. Your newspaper circulations have a wider reach than just a niche Grenadian audience. And your ethos as newsmen and women should reflect this as well. And so I want to welcome on this note my very first guest this morning, Susan Maines. Welcome to the Bubb Report.
Thank you. Thank you. So happy to be with you here this morning.
Yes, it's a pleasure. Viewers, I apologize for the quality of the stream. We're experiencing some static there. But Susan, the reason why I wanted to bring you in is because this year, Grenada is making history at the Biennale exhibition there in Venice, Italy. It's historic because this is the first time we are making representation in the context of architecture. So could you tell us about that festival, which I believe this is the fourth time that Grenada has been represented there, but the first time we're talking about architecture?
Well, I'll tell you directly, and I actually had to have coaching, repeated coaching from
Yes.
Bernardo at La Luna, who is an Italian Grenadian.
Right.
It's Biennale de Venezia. And
Biennale. I was struggling
Biennale.
as well. Okay,
I know.
Biennale. Okay.
It is a hard word to get. And
Right.
after many years of Bernardo correcting me, I think I finally have it. But, don't count on that.
Right.
Biennale de Venezia, it is the oldest and the biggest art event in the world. And Grenada, as a national country, as a nation on its own, has the privilege to be invited to have a pavilion. And in 2015, we were invited for the first time. And so we repeated that for art. In 15, 17, and 19, we're also preparing now for the next one in 22nd, in the year 2022. But this year, we have the privilege of being in the Architectural Biennale for the first time because we were invited as a nation. And what we are showing is the work of the architect Brian Bullen, Grenadian born, Grenadian bred, son of the soil, who designed the new House of Parliament. And so we have been actually working on this project for 3 years since the building was inaugurated. And this year, in spite of everything, of delays, of difficulty of travel, Brian's pavilion representing Grenada, the doors are open in Venice. So we are so happy and proud to show Grenada in that venue in these very challenging times.
Yeah, and you talk about the venue now. I was under the impression that you were actually in Venice, but you tell me that you are in St. George's in Grenada.
I wish I was in Venice.
Right. So tell me the challenges with respect to curating such an exhibition virtually. Could you talk about the challenges that you experienced, especially given that we are still in this COVID period?
The curation part was actually finished more than a year ago because it was supposed to have happened in 2020. The challenge was actually getting it set up. And usually, the commissioner would go, the artist would go, the architects would go, to do the actual physical work of setting it up there. This year, travel was just too complicated. And so we had a team of people on the ground in Venice, headed by Luisa Flora of Officina Desidera. See, I'm speaking Italian already. They worked. We did many, many, many Zooms and WhatsApps to make sure that we were getting it correctly. The pavilion had to be pared down a bit from what was intentioned, streamlined. Nonetheless, it is beautiful.
Now, in terms of that global reach, because that would be one of the eventual outcomes. Now, you are catering that particular festival caters to a particular niche audience,
It does.
which would also mean whenever borders are open, what would that mean? Therefore, for tourism potential. I remember
Um,
covering the Chelsea Flower Show many moons ago on two occasions, the World Travel Market as well. And I remember the impact of that kind of exhibition on tourism arrivals in the country. So could you talk about that?
Yes, for this time, for the Architectural Biennale, there are 63 nations participating. So all of the people who are interested in their own country's representation also become very interested in the representation from other countries. So even if they can't physically go to Venice, they're seeing what's happening. During a regular period of time for the Biennale, they would have be upwards of 600,000 visitors over the 7-month period. This time, they expect a few less because of travel restrictions, but Italy is opening up. Right now, there's no quarantine if you're coming from another European country. I think in July, the United States will be able to have people go to Italy with no quarantine. And so travel will open up again, and there will be more and more visitors, and they will see Grenada. They'll see our flag flying and see our beautiful representation of the House of Parliament, and also Brian's representation of what he envisions for what the Carenage could be.
Part of that new envisioning of the Carenage goes to
And
a perennial debate.
we
Go ahead.
we certainly do expect visitors. We expect visitors from the heart of Europe. We have already had visitors from our previous outings. Another thing is to reach to our own diaspora. When they return to Grenada when they are able to for a holiday or a family visit, that they become engaged with some of these artists who are working at world class levels.
Now, you talk about, and Brian talks about reimagining the urban space in the town of St. George. That has been a perennial debate in Grenada,
It has.
especially in the context of the town of St. George, maintaining that facade, but also the problem of space. There is no space, right? So how do you reimagine or re-envision a town of St. George where we have that kind of walkable
This
urban
is
space?
exactly what Well, this is exactly what Brian is imagining, particularly on the Carenage side. Aside from space, it also requires a look at the underpinnings of the ring road around the Carenage. We have rising sea levels. The sea is impacting that. It's taking away some of those undergirding supports. So his plan looks at that as well. The best thing to do would be to go to our website, grenadavenice.org, and you can see some of the illustrations and some of his thoughts. It's written out. You can see it of what his plan is. I think, Kellan, that you should interview Brian on another occasion.
I would love to have, as a matter of fact, I would love to bring on Brian because one of the
Yes,
things I am very passionate about heritage and history. And one of the things that I'm concerned about is the public library there in the town of St. George. But I think
yes.
we need to have a broader conversation about just the role of architecture in cultural identification, right? What does that mean for us as a people? So I would
Absolutely.
love to have Brian back. You let him know
Absolutely.
that he has a date with the Bubb Report at some point in the
I
future.
will. I will. The show in Venice goes on for 7 months, so we need to keep
Okay.
talking about it and talking about different aspects of it. I am sure that he would agree to having an interview with you to talk about that, not only the House of Parliament, but also that envisioning that he has for the Carenage.
Absolutely. I would love to bring him back on to talk about that. Susan, any final thoughts or comments from you before we get to the next segment?
I just want to encourage people to inform themselves. Go on the website. There's also pictures on Instagram. There's also a page on Facebook. I encourage Grenadians to take hold of it. Kellen, I want you to ask me why. Why do we bother? Why do we do this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The answer is this. We seek a Grenada for our children and our grandchildren that is better than what we have now, that we instill in them the passion for our own history, our own art, our own
Mm-hmm.
stories, so that they can aspire, so our young people can aspire, you know, to think one day I could be the person showing in Venice. I
Mm-hmm.
could be the architect for a new building that will enhance the lives of others. So
Mm-hmm.
we do it because life is bigger than any can.
Yeah. Susan, thank you so much. You're breaking up there at the tail end, but we certainly appreciate your representation on the Bubb Report this morning. We will be in touch. I would love to have Brian on. We will be having a program on heritage in the future, and we want to center that around what is happening and we have a link here. I believe Super Trees posted at grenadavenice.org. And so viewers, you're
That's
also
right.
encouraged to check out that website as well.
Thank you
Susan,
so
thank you so
much,
much.
Kellen.
Enjoy the rest
Great
of
to
your
talk to you
Sunday.
this morning. You too.
Okay. Bye
Bye.
bye. Take care. Folks, stand by. We will be right back.
We are very proud to be in the Biennale for the second time. The 56th edition was our first time, and of course that comes with many insecurities and fears, but now we are welcomed back to the Biennale. We feel like we are standing tall and strong, and we are so proud to present our Grenada artists.
This art piece began with a collection of sardine and seafood cans. I noticed them as I traveled around the world. I noticed the differences in the pieces in different countries and the way that they presented it for their potential customers. And they appeared very pretty to me and different. And so I started collecting them with nothing in particular in mind at the time. And as the collection evolved, I recognized the differences in the movement of people, the differences not just in the pieces, but in the fact that people are different and at the same time, they're the same. The food that they eat, the things that we share. So this piece is a collaboration of many, many people. It's family and friends and co-workers. My piece, it's just based in Grenada because that's where I live and that's where I put it together. But at the same time, it comes from the rest of the world. And that is why it is a privilege to be here.
All right, welcome back, folks. That was an excerpt from a previous Biennale festival in which Grenada was represented. And so, at this time, I want to take the opportunity to welcome my guests for our first panel segment of the morning. That is Senator Christopher Dialli, who is out there in St. George's, and Mr. Brian Grimes, who is the newly elected president of the Grenada Public Workers Union. He identifies himself as an avid trade unionist. But gentlemen, we want to get into it and really get into a conversation around the merits of contract labor in Grenada. Mr. Grimes, that has been one of the issues you have been championing for years. The fact that many workers in Grenada are not properly regularized. Now, Mr. Grimes, you also said that there appears to be a cultural shift with respect to younger Grenadian workers' attitudes towards trade unions, that they do not have any interest in trade unions anymore. So, what do you think, Mr. Grimes, is the reason why young people do not have that interest? Would you tie that to issues of workers being on contract, or do you think that there is a culture in the union that probably needs to change?
Yes. Well, thanks for having me on. As per usual, I just want to congratulate you on elevating journalism in our country. Last week, I didn't see the program and I was a bit disappointed. I was looking forward to whatever you had.
Yes.
So that should tell you this is not just my opinion alone, but many viewers across the Tri-Island state, regionally, and so forth. So keep up the good works with that in terms of raising the journalism bar across the region, not just in Grenada.
Thank you, sir.
The contract work situation, like you said, I've been championing it for years. It's like the white elephant in the room at this point in time. No one is talking about it, but I will endeavor to be like John the Baptist and keep speaking about it, John the Baptist in the wilderness, or Noah before the flood came. Because I know I'm speaking from a position of truth, and that this form of labor, of employment, can literally destroy the public service. And we are seeing it happening on a daily basis here at the Public Workers Union. Contract work, some say it has its merits. The first thing I'd like to start off with is by saying we are not saying contract work is illegal at the Public Workers Union. We are not saying that at all. In the Labor Relations Act, under Section 29, it speaks to different types of contracts for specific tasks, contracts for specified time, contracts for an unspecified time, which is basically permanent work. But in Grenada, less and less permanent work is being actualized and recognized in our country. They are going the temporary way right through, which is very, very disadvantageous to workers in our country. Now, I'm going to broach this topic from a public sector perspective. Yes, it affects both public and private, but because I am president of the Public Workers Union and I see directly the negatives of this type of employment, I will approach it from that end. Now, the first thing is, as is stated openly over and over again, contract work financially handicaps public officers, right? They cannot go to the bank and get serious loans for even cars, much less we're not even talking about mortgages for land and houses. How can you get that? How can a bank, in any seriousness, give somebody on contract for, let's say, an average of $1,500, $1,600 on 2 years, give them a $200,000 loan or $250,000 loan? It's not happening. So our officers are being financially handicapped by that. Also, the contract work situation in the public service creates an inequitable environment. What do I mean by that? There are contract officers sitting side by side with those who are blessed to be established and permanent, doing the same job. In fact, at times they are even performing it possibly at a higher level, and they are not getting the same benefits. For example,
I'm going to stop you there. You said some of the contract workers are performing these jobs at sometimes a higher level. Is that what you just
Yes,
said?
yes,
Okay,
that
so
happens.
therefore my question is, what does that say about permanent workers in the system? And what does it say about the culture of the public service, where you have contract workers who, as you just said, are performing better in some cases than workers who are properly established?
Yes, so when I made that statement, it was not to decry permanent work in terms of the productivity of those established workers, but it was just to magnify the point that contract officers are contributing to the development of this country just as established workers.
Okay.
So the narrative that the public service is not productive or whatever it is, I would say that that is a non-starter. We can always improve, both public sector and I dare say private sector. But no success that the government has spoken of is without the hard work and the diligence of public officers in the country, both contract and permanent. So I would say, as I was stating earlier, the system it shows a lot of inequity, brother Bob, because you have contract officers sitting with established workers doing the same job, and when salary increases are negotiated for, the government, the employer, refuses to apply those increases to those officers. Can you imagine that? They have to face the same things as other individuals and other officers, raising of the gas prices, the basket of goods going up, the inflation rising exponentially. Contract officers have to face that. But the disadvantage for them is that their salary remains the same through that hurricane of events. And this must change, and the employer must recognize that this must change.
Okay, Mr. Grimes, I'm going to bring in Senator Dialli at this point, who comes from obviously a different side of the fence. Again, this is all angles. We want to have the balanced approach here. And Senator Dialli, you are an entrepreneur. You run Citizens Paints. You've been doing that for decades, right? I remember, and you also represent the business community in the Senate as a private sector representative. Now, from a private sector lens, Senator Dialli, what are your thoughts? Do you think that, again, the issue of contract labor is something that is a serious problem in Grenada?
Good morning.
Good morning. Yes, again. Go ahead.
Good morning to you, Karen, and good morning to my brother Grimes. I haven't had the opportunity to publicly congratulate him on his ascension to the presidency of the Public Workers Union. My brother, congratulations, and I trust and I know you will do them very well. And good morning to your viewers on the Facebook and YouTube platforms as well, Karen. Let me just start by saying that I believe that contract work, employees being on contract, is going to be here to stay, whether it's in the public or the private sector. I think the labor movement will have to now start adjusting to that new reality, because it's going to be happening, and it's going to be happening more and more. And I dare say that COVID is going to increase and bring that on for us quicker than we expect. And I will explain in a little while. And let me just go to the issue of outsourcing, because that is part of what we talk about in contract work. And I'll introduce another term here that I'm going to introduce, called resource sharing, shared resources. And that you're seeing that happening now in a greater degree in the private sector, probably not in the private as yet. Again, it is brought about by digitization and what is happening on the digital platforms in many of our businesses and across the world and the environment. Government is into a heavy digitization of its various departments and processes and paper. And at the end of the day, we are going to see a situation where shared services and outsourcing is going to become more of the norm. I think the union movement and the labor movement have to now adjust. You know, Keran, we are coming from a situation where we were a heavily industrialized world, and where unionism and the trade union movement grew rapidly in the developed world and in the not so developed world. Now the shift is into services, and a services type oriented environment, which doesn't lend well to the traditional form of unionization and labor movement as we know it. Hence the reason I'm saying that the labor movement will now start to have to make some adjustments to the way in which they operate and entertain the membership. I want to take up a couple of things
yeah, go ahead.
that Brother Grimes raised, and the first one was loans, and the fact that when you're on contract, employees are disadvantaged because they cannot go to financial institutions and get the requisite mortgages or loans for vehicles, as you indicated. That is not so at all. That environment has changed. That is no longer the case. In a recent program done by Mr. Richard Duncan and another area called Perspectives, another program that I'm part of, Mr. Duncan made it very clear that their bank have adopted and made changes to facilitate workers on contracts so that they could get kind of financial arrangements. I know certain credit unions that are into that as well. And I know other major financial institutions are making changes to the way they approach lending, particularly for workers on contracts, and the ability for them to gain mortgages and other financial arrangements that they need. So it is not about the fact that they are going to be disadvantaged by that mechanism anymore. The financial institutions recognize that this is a new mode of operation, and that is the way we're going to move ahead. I also want to quickly make
Senator,
a comment.
yeah, quick,
Yes, go ahead.
yeah, let me just unpack what you just said there. If I'm on a contract, and by the way, in preparation for this program, I've received off the record comments from persons who lost contracts. They were on contract for whether it's a 2-year contract, 3-year contract. Their contracts were never renewed. So therefore, what happens in a case where you have a 3-year contract, the bank gives you a loan for an extended period of 5 years, but you cannot get another job, then what happens in that case, Senator?
Well, obviously, when the bank would have done the underwriting of the particular credit facility, they would have taken into into consideration the risk of the person not getting contract renewed, and they would have what they would have prepared for that worker. In other words, what are the alternatives for income, or what are the alternatives for moratoriums on the loan? What is there available for that worker for them to get another employment or to get another type of job or some other income to keep the loan facility being paid? So the underwriting risk to those types of lending would take into consideration all that type of issues. But primarily, Kellan, I think part of the risk analysis for the bank is if you're doing a loan to a contract worker for 3 years or whatever the case may be, you will also want to understand the employability of the worker. How can that worker raise alternative revenue to secure the payment of the loan? It's not just only about the contract that they have with the primary employer. They will look at other avenues that can be arranged. So it is a risk-sharing arrangement. But I say that because most of these financial institutions now understand that new environment and are working to design their packages and their loans to facilitate that.
And you wanted to make another point before I ask you that question. Is there another point that you wanted to make? And then I'm going to have Mr. Grimes come back in again.
Quickly, I know Grimes brought up the issue of same work for and not same pay for people who are working alongside those on contracts and those are tenured. And I'm using the word tenured and not permanent. And there's a reason for that. There's no job in the world that is permanent. There's a difference between contract and tenured workers. And we need to get this permanent issue because, as I just mentioned, in this new environment in which COVID has created and digitization is going to create, it is about the employee being employable. In other words, having more than one skill and being able to apply it as they see it and as the environment change. But the thing about the same benefits, I know of situations in the public workers, in the public service, of workers on contract who have not been given increases that they would have negotiated for established workers and the public workers union, but they all pay the same union dues. And workers, contract workers in the public service, because the law says they must pay the union dues if the main union is representing the workers, the union have not gotten them the increases that they ought to, and these employees feel very disadvantaged. So that is the thing, again, the public workers union have to deal with. And as we walk it along, I think as services become more the mode of operation, for example, you're going to see a lot of services industries develop in the sense that what services can I offer to the main employer? Is it going to be in pesticide control? Is it going to be in in sanitization? Is it going to be in digitization? What other services are now going to come and is going to challenge the union movement, because their base is going to be eroded and the normal form of income is going to be threatened, because more and more people are going to be outsourced and forming their own companies now to render services to the employer, more so than what it is now, where you are a tenured worker on the payroll. Similarly, we have that same thing happening, and that's what shared services is about. In major companies where you have conglomerates, there are situations where you've seen it in the financial institutions, you've seen it in other large conglomerates, where we outsource or we share services, for example, in things like accounting, back office operations, digitization and IT, health and risk, health and safety, risk analysis. All of those things are now going to be shared services among huge companies that have many subsidiaries. And that is going to be the continued mode of operation. Karen, you know, since COVID, most of us don't ever travel again to do board meetings. Everything now is by Zoom or Teams, and companies are saving. That is going to be the new mode of operations. And I say this to say that the trade union movement will have to adjust its primary mode of operation to facilitate that change in environment.
Uh, uh, Mr. Grimes, Senator Diali has thrown out a challenge to you, but he's also, I would say, provided a very extensive justification, if you will, of some of the arguments that you're advancing. But I think one of the interesting points that Senator Diali made there was just about that risk analysis that banks make with respect to offering loans. But he's also thrown out a challenge to you and the union movement with respect to retooling and reimagining trade unionism for the 21st century in an environment where the business really, private sector, government, they are essentially looking at ways of maximizing efficiency while also reducing cost. Mr. Grimes?
Yeah. Yes. Thanks. So I would want to respond by stating, me and Mr. Diale, we seem to be operating in different universes, different realities. Now, let me qualify my statement. How can it be possible for a contract officer to go to a lending institution and ask for a mortgage, a 20-year mortgage, and is on a 2-year contract? We can come up with all the fanciful terms and so forth, and the employability ratio and this, that, and the other. What is the reality in Grenada, Brother Bob? Employment is very tough to attain in this country, right? We don't have a lot of industries. We don't have a lot of local things happening. And so people have to rely on, being employed by institutions, organizations, traditional, the Huggins, the Hubbards, the government of Grenada. This is the reality that we face in Grenada at this point in time. So we cannot have all these fanciful terms. And now, Brother Diali is speaking on behalf, I would say, of the minority, the business community. Brian Grimes,
but they are employers. The business community are the employers, but they are part of the employers. The St. George University, they're a private business, the second largest employer in the country.
Yes,
but
yes.
Please proceed.
Of course, they have their rights. But what I'm saying to you, I am speaking on behalf of the masses, the many. The employees are more. The employees are greater stakeholders overall in terms of numbers. So there must be a healthy balance and a healthy medium. Let me just say this. You see this document here? I want the viewers to look at it. This is the Constitution of Grenada of 1973. And like I stated earlier in my presentation, I am going to focus on the public sector. In section 83 to 93 of this document, it speaks to the public service in general. It speaks to the Public Service Commission, an institution set up to ensure that the public service is run well. As we are here in 2021, this institution, the Public Service Commission, is being undermined by the political directorate, and they are being pushed aside for the placement of the Department of Public Administration, and this is where the contracts are being pushed. Let me just say this, and this is extremely important. There are two types of contracts, basically, that we know. There's the contract of service, and this has been done and issued by the Public Service Commission, which I just spoke about, where union dues are paid and NIS is paid and so forth. Traditionally, it's not the best thing in terms of contract because we prefer permanent work, but it's workable in some respects. The new type of contract that is being pushed by the government, setting the example for the private sector, is contract for service. And do you know what the implications are for that? Let me tell you. The contract for service, workers are being told you have to pay your entire 11% NIS, right? 11% NIS on your own. Do you know what happens? The worker decides, I'm not going to pay that because the wage is already small. Who suffers? The golden goose, an important institution, the National Insurance Scheme. Their remittances get less as a result of this new type of employment that is being the government and most employers are flirting with at this point in time. This does not help Grenada. In addition, one of the best institutions you can find in any country is a trade union. Great leaders speak about it. Barack Obama. Historically, during the period of the revolution, trade unions were elevated, and that arguably was one of the most progressive periods in the history of our country. As we see now, the employers, capital, the political directorate, they are using overt and covert measures to undermine unions. And one way is by not issuing or allowing workers to pay union dues, so they are therefore eroding the capital base of trade unions and our union, particularly the Public Workers Union in this country. How, pray tell, can anyone, including Brother Diali, explain to an intelligent listener, an intelligent Grenadian, how does this type of contract, which is the new norm and the so-called advance that they are speaking, how does that benefit Grenada? It is damaging the National Insurance Scheme. It is also damaging trade unions, and it is undermining the security, the job security of Grenadian workers. So I'm very interested in knowing how does this advance, literally advance our country and our people.
Let me give Senator. Yes, go ahead, Senator.
First of all, you have made a fundamental mistake. NIS cannot be threatened even though you're a contract or not, because NIS is law, legal, mandatory. Whether you're self-employed or not, you have to pay NIS. So any worker who chooses not to pay NIS is at their own detriment and breaking the law. That's the first thing. So let's stick there. They must pay NIS whether you're privately employed, you are an entrepreneur or not. That is the law in the country. So it is up to them if they want to take that risk and not pay NIS at all. The other part about contract work is you have to recognize in a contract work and the contract that is established. I can't speak about government and what happens in the public service, but I know for sure that when you establish a contract with somebody in the private sector, there are other attributes to the contract that may speak to in terms of gratuity at the end of the contract of the 3 years and all those type of things that would assist the worker to develop their own pension plans, as happens now in a lot of other advanced economies in the world, where most work is by contract and a lot of them have to develop their own pension and investment plans for their years when they get to the twilight years. In parts of the US, we know about certain types of 401ks and all these different types of investment instruments that are offered to workers who are on contract, so they could put away for themselves and have their own savings develop. So it doesn't disadvantage them, is of course, if the worker wants to choose a particular place or go where he wants to go, fine. That is the worker to do that, but that doesn't disadvantage them. It's a matter of how you do what you do. And let me just say to you, Brother Grimes, the issue of the banks and financial institutions is not me that say it. As I said before, it was Mr. Duncan, the managing director of Grenada Cooperative Bank, who said it, not me, right? He said that the banks are now catering for people who work on contracts, whether it's 3 years or whatever amount of years, on their ability to renew, on their ability to be employable. and how they do it to give them mortgages and other types of lending. Not me. I am just saying that the financial institutions have not recognized that contract work is here to stay. It is not going away. It is here to stay, and it's going to become more and more of something that we see happening across the private sector and across the public sector. And all I'm saying is that the labor movement needs to recognize that that is going to be a new mode of work and how workers are engaged. For example, if I outsource security services in a particular place and a company develops with security guards and they now have their own company, the union now have to go after that own company, that new company, that outsourced company, and see if they can engage their workers in a union arrangement. The union movement, the labor movement may now have to change its mode of operation and offer consultancy services to negotiate contracts on behalf of contract workers. There are new modes of operation that the labor movement will have to get into as this environment changes. That's all I'm saying.
But Mr. Diali, the labor movement also has to operate within the confines of the law and the labor code, right? There would be certain protocols. They cannot represent legally people who are on contract. That's not something. So, Mr. Grimes, again, he's throwing out the same challenge again.
No, the labor code will facilitate any group of workers. I could have 12 workers in an establishment on contract. The law says, and the Constitution, as Brother Grimes just showed us, nobody can be denied the opportunity to do collective bargaining or to come in a group and offer themselves for collective bargaining. You can't stop that.
Correct. But at the same time, Senator Diali, you are a business owner. You may say that you don't want to have a collective bargaining unit among contract workers at your place of work, and you may decide to terminate the contract of those employees who choose to go that route.
Or we may
I'm not saying you, but
no. Or we may say it is easier to deal with 12 individual contract persons or take them as a group because it makes more efficiency for the business to operate that way. The issue is not whether you come as a group or you come individually. For us, individually is more time and more time consuming. If you come as a group, the real issue is the contents of what we want to negotiate and whether or not we are going to agree on the contents. That is essentially what it is. Mm-hmm. So in other words, I'm saying what we know as collective bargaining arrangements, CBAs, are going to change. And that is going to have to facilitate the environment of service industries versus industrialized industries.
So let us get to some comments because I know, Senator, you have to run shortly. So thank you for indulging us today. But Margaret Francis is saying the main problem with contract work in places like Grenada is political victimization. The contract worker survives at the will of the party/government in power. Senator Diali, what are your thoughts on that comment?
Well, I don't know if that, I can't comment on that, on the political victimization. I have never been part of the government service, so I don't know. Grimes, I see Grimes is smiling, so probably Grimes have more information at his fingertips on that. What I can say, I know there have been a lot of debate in Grenada on government using a particular vote. I can't remember what is the number, no, vote 342 or 342 or whatever.
I think it's, yes, one of them.
Right, that speaks to government bringing in contract people to do certain activities. But when you talk to the politicians, you'll hear the politicians say to you, and that is a reality, I suspect Grimes could speak to that as well, that the public service is a place that has been politicized as well. You have people who support one party over the next. Politicians who are policy implementers will say when they go to their PSs and other government staff, they don't implement, they don't do what they ask them to do. Hence the reason they have to employ people to come in on contracts to get things done and to have it done, because some people have a different political suasion to the party in power, and that hampers the efficiency and productivity of what they want to get implemented. So those are some of the realities as well. And that is why you hear government ministers saying, okay, I have to bring in this person on contract because I need to get my policies implemented and done. I can't speak to them. I've never worked with the government and I don't know, but you hear these debates and these comments coming from both sides, the politicians and otherwise.
And there's also debates about public sector reform and reforming efficiencies in the public service. But I make the point, Dr. Al Gonzalez says all the time, you cannot run the public service as if it were a private business, right? So you have that debate as well. But another comment, Testibari, saying historically, excuse me, we've had persons' jobs compromised when they attempt to join a union. ask Chester Humphrey about that. I'm guessing he's saying that people are threatened. I mean, Senator Diallo in the private sector, I mean, you can speak to if a group of workers at your company decides that they want to get unionized, what would be your approach to dealing with it?
But let me just say, the union for us in the private sector is not our enemy. I can tell you that. I have worked with one of the more militant unions in my company for the last 20 plus years, which is TAU. We have never had a bad relations because we don't see them as the enemy. We see them as having the right to protect their union members and to bring certain things to the floor that the business need to pay attention to, and vice versa. So if a private enterprise looks at a union as the enemy, that is the first mistake they're making. We have to bring them in as a partner. But I must say as well, the labor movement don't always want to work with us as partners. When we have to talk, take for example, the issue of vaccinations. We have invited our union members and our union colleagues to come on board with the private sector to deal with the issue of hesitancy and how we deal with that. The union movement have supported us and said that they are encouraging workers to get vaccinated. And that is a good thing when the union and the management of a company can come together on an issue to try to influence a particular outcome. It doesn't always happen. They are very proactive in health and safety. But there are a lot of trade union movements that only come to the table when it's time for collective bargaining. And you don't ever see them for the next 3 years or the duration of the agreement. And that is an issue that both the employer and the union movement have to work on. Because we are not, from the time Kellan, in my view, you view the trade union movement or labor movement as the enemy of the private sector, you're heading down the wrong road. I have never done that. I have always treated them as my partners and to assist me in ensuring that the workforce in my particular business have the best environment to work with and other issues that surround us. So it has never been.
But at the same time, Senator, you are the representative of the private sector in the Senate. So are you saying that your attitude with respect to viewing the unions as a partner is a prevailing attitude in the private sector? Because some may say that it's not.
No, there are instances in the private sector where the relationship with the labor movement is acrimonious. That is for certain. That is not without doubt. But there are a lot of businesses that treat the union movement as their partners, and they do not have major issues. And if we were to go back to the ILO, which all of us as businesses, employers, and trade union movement accede to, the ILO encouraged a tripartite kind of arrangement, which is government, labor, and private sector. And at no time do we see it as being one of adverse relationship. It must be a partnership at all levels with mutual respect for all sides. And if we are to adopt that kind of attitude, I don't think the environment is going to be one where it's a constant fight. So even though I articulate on the private sector, I always advise my private sector colleagues, and I always say very openly and in public, that the trade union movement has its purpose and its function is to ensure that labor is organized, labor is protected, the fundamental rights are protected, and they are there. There are employers who really do wrong things to employees. That is a fact, and that exists. And the labor movement, there are a lot of companies and businesses in Grenada where workers are not unionized. We could talk about the small businesses in the capital where they employ 4 and 5 people, and they don't seem to have any representation in some of the retail businesses, and there are reports of serious exploitation issues happening there, and the labor movement have not yet come to the point where they could coalesce and get a number of these workers together to protect their rights under the labor law and other things. So there are situations, Kellan, where that is the case, but there are also situations where companies treat their workers so well that workers are not interested in going to a union to get any of the rights and freedoms as they are entitled to under the labor law and under the Constitution.
Okay, Senator Grimes, again, you've heard Senator Diallo. He has given us a lot to think about, giving you, really, as a representative of the union, to think about, with, again, the underlying theme here is just retooling and reimagining what trade unionism ought to look like with respect to how they represent workers' interests in this period where employers, the prerogative of employers is increasingly changing, as Senator Diallo said, because of digitization, service economy orientation, and things like that. What say you, Mr. Grimes?
Yes, I would just like to piggyback a little bit on the comment you read earlier about political victimization. In the series of negatives that contract work gives public officers, and again, I want to reiterate, it seems as though myself and Senator Diali, we are in alternate universe. He openly confessed that he does not know a lot about the public service. Brian Grimes and the union does know a lot about the public service. No, political victimization is an issue, especially, and it's coupled and married with the use of contract work. I just want to rattle off a few names for you. Gemma Bain Thomas, Willan Thompson, Cajetan Hood, Richard Duncan, Veronica Charles, Paul Graham. What do these individuals have in common? They were victims of the system that the political directorate is trying to, broaden, and they are trying to undermine the powers of the Public Service Commission, which is in our constitution. So they are trying to overtake the public sector and the public service, undermine the PSC, and workers are the ones that are facing the brunt of that. Again, we here at the union, we are speaking for the masses. I am not here speaking for one individual. Now, if you do your research, you will speak to many workers who speak about the negatives of the contract work in terms of the institutions. Now, Brother Diali reference Mr. Richard Duncan, who is a respectable man. But I can reference at least 10 to 15, at least off the top of my head, workers who have come and complained about the troubles that they see in trying to secure loans. And this is the reality. The majority must rule. Our country is not an oligarchy where a handful determines the policies for the many. The voice of the masses must be heard. And we are saying that contract work is not the way to go. We are being victimized. Look, we have the 4% issue. You may not see many public officers on the streets. You may tell yourself, well, look, all is well. It is not well. It is because many of them are under contract and they are afraid of their bread being taken. Is this an egalitarian or society that is developing where you have a handful of people wielding that mighty whip over the many and telling them, if you don't do as we say, bread will be taken from you and you can no longer provide for yourselves and your families. This is what contract work is doing. They are married together. They are inextricably linked, and this must be changed. I am fundamentally in disagreement with Brother Diali in his position that contract work is here to stay in certain capacities. I'm fundamentally in disagreement. Yes, as I stated earlier in my presentation, contract work is not illegal, but the application, especially in the public service, has been misused. Brother Bubb, I know you are au fait with current affairs. That is your job. Look what is happening within the health sector. Look what is happening there. For years, the unions have been stating over and over, do not contract nurses. That is a profession. They study for 3.5 years. They are constitutionally recognized. Give them permanent work. They are not asking for $1 million salaries. The authorities have not listened. What is the smoking gun? What has happened as a result of that? You have a massive brain drain where the UK, the US, and some,
Ireland as well is attracting Grenadian nurses as well.
Yes, they are taking away the nurses, and not because the nurses want a humongous salary. They just want respect and job security. And this goes for the wider public service also. So it's clear, the writing is on the wall. The authorities are misusing contract work. It is the elephant in the room and it needs to be addressed. Our union, let me tell you this, our union is basically fighting for our very existence based on the misuse of this contract work. Because the government is using the attrition policy whereby after 10 workers retire, they only take in 3. And guess what? Do you think that they are taking in the 3 under regular Public Service Commission rules and policies? No, they are using their own insidious and nefarious policies to put these workers on that contract. Again, telling them now, you can pay your 11% NIS, which they choose, most of them choose not to. You don't have to pay union dues, and they are undermining our organization. So we must fight. We must fight. Yes, contract work is here to stay, but within a certain framework and category, consultancies, tasks, and so forth. One cannot intelligently argue that the nursing sector should be contracted out, for example, in the face of massive brain drain and disenchantment from that particular fraternity. Are we truly living in a democracy where the few call the shots for the many?
Okay, I know that Senator Diallo, you have to go, so I'm going to give you an opportunity here to rebut and to give us some final summations.
Right. I will just say to Brother Grimes that nurses, whether they're on contract or tenured, you cannot stop them from moving based on the offer that is going to be put on them, based on the demands for the profession at this point in time. Whether they're a contract worker, as a matter of fact, I know of some contract workers that they don't want to be tenured or permanent because they want the flexibility to move when the contract comes to an end. Nurses in particular, because of the demand, you will find that whether they're permanent or not, the issue is not that. The issue is whether or not we could pay them based and give them the kind of securities otherwise than pay that they will get here versus going to somewhere like Ireland or somewhere else where the offer will probably be a lot better. And to me, it's not about whether
but Senator, at the same time, wouldn't we need to incentivize our best and our brightest to remain on island to contribute to the development of the country?
Of course. Let me tell you, Kera, the most consistent export Grenada have had in the last 20 years have been what? It is not nutmeg and cocoa.
It's people.
And it is not bananas. It has been our people. Why? The question has to be why. We have had the issue of brain drain for the last 30 years. We have Grenadians and in those various diaspora that is probably far more than our population. And that has been our most consistent export. There is nothing wrong with it. What we have not done as a country is to maximize it and to have it as a real offer of export and train people for relevant areas where we can supply the people to go in the relevant areas. We talk about high unemployment among our youth. We put in the youth in particular career paths that can give them international viability and they can move. One of the advantages of Grenadians moving out of the country is remittances. Remittances is a massive part of the economic cycle for us. Not only here in Grenada, in Jamaica and other countries, it is a major GDP part of the GDP. So there's nothing wrong about it. But I agree that we need to keep some of our best and brightest here and incentivize it so that they can stay here. And what we have to offer, and hopefully they will stay. But not all of us will stay because you can offer a man $20,000 a month to work in Grenada and somebody comes and offers him 25 and some other things and they move. That is just the reality of the world we live in. Mobility now is not confined to where geography. You can have doctors using telemedicine, stay in Grenada and do analysis of x-rays and different things around the world. But they choose to live in Grenada because of the environment and the people and the crime rate and all of that, and they choose to live here. So there are a lot of other things besides pay that will attract a worker to stay in a particular jurisdiction. So it is not about just looking at it from a thing of contract or tenure or permanent or not. That don't operate again. And that's why I keep saying the environment has changed and COVID has now brought realities to us. I heard my brother talk about the Public Service Commission, but you know, Brother Grimes, the Public Service Act is something that is antiquated. I think it was done in the 1940s, and I could be wrong, could be earlier than that. And we have not had any major amendments to the Public Service Act. You have PSAs, and I can tell you that Canada one as a fact, even though I'm not in the public service, that cannot discipline workers for coming late in the amount of bureaucracy and letters that have to be written and so on in order to get a staff to be suspended or dealt with or disciplined in whatever way for late coming is something that really needs. And I hope under your tenure, you can be able to bring amendments to the Public Service Act, something that needs to be greatly amended. And some of your predecessor presidents have tried, like Mrs. Clarkson and others, and we have not gotten anywhere with that Public Service Act. And I hope that one day I can see a young, bright mind like yours bring it to the fore and get some of the changes done to get the public service more efficient, than they need to be than they are now. And we still have a lot of complaints about that, as you may well know. And I'm not saying there are not good workers in the public service. There are excellent workers in the public service, but there are a majority and a number of others who are not as good as some of the good ones. And you always hear the complaints. I could tell you, as a private sector interacting with the public service, we are two different time warps. We are at a different speed to the public service. And let me tell you the most important thing that happened in the public service recently, and the private sector has jumped on it and have welcomed it and have championed this move. You see, when we digitize the payment of taxes, land and house tax, licenses, and all the other taxes, and we could sit in our offices and pay, that was probably one of the greatest things that happened in our government service when we digitized that part. It did a great thing for government. They got monies instantly. We, as customers of the government for this area, didn't have the issue of long lines and wasting hours. So we saved many in terms of efficiency and time by digitizing that particular service. And the other important thing, it was international. Anybody in Grenada living in any part of the world could have logged onto the system and paid. That was something we didn't have before. And that is what I'm saying to my brother Grimes, that as that environment change, Kellon, and develops and is moved into by government, we are going to see marginalizations of certain positions. Take, for example, the supermarkets. We have Dcash now. I could go in the supermarket and pay with my phone. I could go online and order my products in the supermarket and go to a window and pay with my phone. I don't need to go into the supermarket physically, stand up in front of a line of a cashier and wait for half an hour or more, depending on the length of the line and the time of the month, when I could do that offline and pay by my phone with Dcash. That is where we have to go. And that is where we are going, whether Brother Grimes want to face it or not. And that is where we are. And as that environment changes, that is what I'm saying, Kellon, labor movement have to adjust to those changes. We cannot come to the table and only think about collective bargaining negotiations that we have done in the last 40 years. That will change, and it will force us there. The environment will force us into different modes of operation that we have no choice. Look at the cell phone. I always say, in my time, I knew of things like beepers and all of that. Now the cell phone does everything. We can now pay with the cell phone. It's amazing the changes that happen. And we have no choice, Grimes. The cell phone that you have no choice but to have it, or else you'll be obsolete. Thank you, Kellon. I thank you for the time and the platform, and I hope I may have contributed to this discussion in some positive way.
Well, I think, and that's the point, right? The point is balance, and I think hearing from you, as you're not only an employer, but you also represent the private sector. Again, the private sector is obviously the second largest employer, and if we think about private sector, we can also disaggregate the private sector as the small supermarket owner who might be employing 2 or 3 workers in the community.
The largest employer,
right?
Correct. Single employer, but we're the largest employer.
Largest employer outside of government. Yes, you are correct. Yeah, but Mr. Grimes, you wanted to jump in.
Yes, I've listened to Senator Diali, and he seems to be convoluting the arguments, where one thinks or imagines that the advent of digitization represents something that says contract work is the new order of the day. Permanent work and digitization, they are not mutually exclusive. They can happen together. So yes, we welcome the digitization of the public service, but we also welcome permanent work for our workers. Now, it must be seen and emphasized within the public service that the contract work is not being used to develop Grenadian workers or our country. Political victimization is one of the major instruments the government is using with this contract work, and it can be seen. They don't renew a contract not based on productivity, but based on perceived political affiliation within the Public Service Commission and the public service in general, the public service rather. The government, by use of the contract work, is also attempting to shirk their responsibility to Grenadians by preventing certain benefits for workers. For example, pension. Now, if and when, Senator Diali, your modus operandi takes place within the public service, do you know what happens? Do you know what happens? The public service will be filled with contract officers, and that will negate government's responsibility in terms of a pension when that is solved. Does that help Grenada? Now, social security is an important, a very, very important aspect of any advancing country. Now, if a government is deciding now to shirk that responsibility, let everybody handle on their own rather than take care of the people after they give 20, 30, 40 years of service to the nation, is that a progressive regime or government? I would say no. So the instrument, particularly the instrument of the contract within the public service, it's not for good intentions for the country or for workers, it's for nefarious intentions. And I have proof and evidence to back that. And I have people and workers who are of the same opinion, who live and experience it on a daily basis. Now, I want to take the opportunity to ask stakeholders in Grenada, those who are vying for leadership of this country, the National Democratic Congress, the Grenada Movement, the Grenada Empowerment Movement, civil society, for them to chime in on this particular issue of contract work. Because as a leader, myself as a leader, I do not just look at the immediate. I look at developing trends and how it could affect institutions and our countries down the road. And I can see that this contract work and this type of contract that they are issuing, it will have negative repercussions. Again, I want to reiterate to listeners, digitization and permanent work are not mutually exclusive. They can happen together. So we want public service reform in that way, but we also want sustainable development for our workers, as stated, it was stated earlier about the International Labour Organization, the United Nations, and so forth. Under the Sustainable Development Goal number 8, decent work is an important aspect of it. Contract work is not decent work.
Say that. Do not say that, and do not put that out in public. That is erroneous information. You know better than that. And I would leave, can I leave it one thing? I know Brother Grimes can answer it better than me. I heard our Minister of Finance said one time that teachers in particular had many contracts and they have regularized them and made them tenured or established workers. Brother Grimes could tell me if that is right or wrong. I can't speak to it. I know the Minister of Finance at the time, if it was Prime Minister or Oliver Joseph or one of them who said it, that teachers have been regularized from contract work to established workers, and the government has gone in that direction. I think they need to say that as well as saying that.
And I believe also the Minister of Health made statements to the effect of working towards regularizing the status of the nurses as
hear
well.
him about victimization using contract work, but you must also say the other side too, that you must give it both sides, Brother Grimes, because there's two sides to it, and you must say the other side.
Helping with the other side. You're helping me with the other side.
But the other side,
he said you are helping with the other side.
I don't know how much was
Senator Diali.
But some of them were, and I want to leave you with this, Brother Grimes. I will reiterate this point. There is an issue about employability of the regular worker that you need to encourage in your movement. It is not just about becoming a unifocal person. You must have more than one issue, because you will become is your employability going forward. You know. Let me tell you something. I may disagree with me. COVID did one thing for us in this region. When none of our politicians could make a decision about RIAT, COVID made a decision for us. Did you know that? RIAT has been disbanded because COVID caused it. And none of our politicians could have done it because there was always political infighting among the countries about RIAT and the direction of RIAT. COVID made a decision. And I say that to you as an example to say, as we go forward in this new environment with the post-COVID, and when we come out of COVID in whatever form, a lot of decisions are going to be made for our workforce and our businesses that is going to change what we knew. And I hear you say we live in different realities. And you accuse me from that from the beginning, that you're in a different reality to me. But I'm going to say to you that I know.
But Senator, that is a reality. That is a reality.
I want to say to my brother that I know that is going to be a challenge for the labor movement as we move forward. That COVID pandemic.
It's one we're willing to accept.
For example, in my business, the rate at which we are developing our digital platform to attract customers is happening at a super fast rate than it was a year or two ago. And I say that to you because when we do that, there are parts of our businesses that are going to transition in such a way we either need less workers or we're going to need workers of a more particular skill that is not going to be available or will be available that we'll have to train. So I say that that change in environment, you may say I'm in a different reality, but trust me, my brother, that reality is right here with us now. And I leave you with that, my good friend.
Brian?
Yes. Well, he speaks a lot about digitization and so forth. And I want to say that we here at the Public Workers Union, we embrace that. But I just like to stick to the points that I made earlier, that the negatives of the contract work cannot be overlooked in this country. The political victimization, the unsecured tenure, and the economic downfall for workers in this country. So yes, I see what Senator Diali is saying concerning what he experiences at the private sector level and at his managerial level. But we here at the Public Workers Union are speaking for the masses, the working class, and they are in a negative or bad situation within our country at this point in time with the misuse of contract labor. So it's a lot of back and forth. It's a lot of here and there. But if this discussion is weighed intelligently and we look at it holistically from the position of our country, we can see that adjustments need to be made. The fact that the Minister of Health is saying that we need to regularize more tells you that permanent work is the way to go to make a happier and more productive workforce. The fact that teachers are being regularized tells you that that makes them happier and that makes the teaching profession more effective and more efficient in the delivery of services. So digitization, we can get workers who can fix the machines, whatever it is. Human beings will never be obsolete. Human beings will never be obsolete. They must always be a factor, and their comfort.
But Mr. Grimes, at the same time, you would have to appreciate that we are experiencing increasing automation in this period as well. You have artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is taking over the world. I work in academia, and I can tell you, even in academia, it's becoming a tenure professor position.
That is the reality in Grenada, that automation and artificial
but at the same time, Grenada is integrated into the international community. Would you say that?
Right now.
Yes.
I hear what you're saying. I respect it. That is a reality. Yes. But we are looking at the current space and the current situation. We are distance away from this automation to the level.
Mr. Grimes,
we are distant away from that. So I think that Senator Diali is pushing that to convolute the arguments and the discussions that we have in here. And I hope that the listeners are not getting sidetracked with that. What is the current reality for Grenadians? And how can we fix that? How can we make Grenadians more comfortable? How can we better the economy? Yes, we must always look futuristically, but we must also look at the present situation to assist our workers and our countrymen. So let's not get it twisted as to
employability, Brother Grimes. Employability. That is the answer.
And Brother Bob, the thing is, the discussion that Brother Diali is bringing here, it goes back to something that you are passionate about: education. Our education system needs to be reformed to train people to be entrepreneurs and so forth, where maybe the contractor format can be better used. As it stands now, we are being trained to give service to organizations and so forth. There are people with degrees, I'm telling you, with degrees within the public service that are on contract with limited pay. Now, in terms of education reform, we are 20, 30, 40 years away from making this vision, Brother Diali's vision, a reality. What happens in the interim? What happens now for our country? This is what we have to look at. So we cannot sacrifice the benefits and the comforts of our Grenadian worker on the altar of seeing a bright or different future for our country. We are dealing with the current realities. Let's stay on point.
I trust, Brother Grimes, are you aware that Gcash is a current reality?
What's the topic of the day, Bob?
Gcash is a current reality.
Gcash is okay. So let's go to some final comments here. Margaret Francis said, "No, I disagree with you on the argument that Grenada is far from digitization. The reality is that Grenada is part of a global community that is rapidly changing, and they will have to change. To quote the Borg, resistance if futile." Wilbur Thomas is saying, "Grimes, you need to look 5+ years ahead. The union needs strategic planning." Joel Greenidge is saying, digitization will make many jobs in Grenada redundant. That will present new challenges. So when we're thinking about, of course, the topic, yes, is contract work, but we also have to think about the environment in which this contract work happens and the realities of that work environment as well. So let's get to another comment. Kinder Williamson is saying, our health professionals are leaving in droves. We spoke about that recently. Mikhail Richard said, since our human resources are at least important, why doesn't the politicians and the capitalists do the work for themselves, and they would see how successful their businesses and public service will be?
Let me answer Mikhail.
Yes.
Let me answer Mikhail if she's not aware.
Yes.
In the private sector, our most important asset, even though it's not included on our balance sheet, is our workforce. And let me further inform Mikhail that the unions don't provide the environment for the workforce. They don't provide pay on time. They don't provide uniforms in a particular way. They don't provide a safe environment. They don't take care of the health. It's the company and the employer that does that. I just want to remind Mikhail.
But Senator Dialli, the union, I was part of the union in Grenada, and I would take exception to that to a certain extent. Unions advocate for safe and equitable working environments.
I said the unions have their role.
Yes.
But remember, Kelon, at the end of the month, our worker coming into my environment is me that have to provide the environment for the safety and comfort of the worker. The union is there to ensure that I follow the laws and the things that I agree to in the collective agreement if we have one. But at the onset, for me to get my workforce to work at a productivity level that I want, it is the private sector and the employer that have to provide the necessary pay, the necessary environment, and the necessary safety protocols to ensure that that worker is happy to come to work and is pleased to be part of that organization that they're working on. Not the movement. And we need to understand that as well.
Let's see how much benefits workers attain without the presence of unions. I'm confident to put forward an argument that if unions don't exist in our country, or their rules are lessened, workers will not be as comfortable and see as many benefits. It's
I'm not correct, Brother Grimes. There are many private sector companies in Grenada without unions.
Clear. The capitalists and the business owners, their whole modus operandi is looking at the bottom dollar rather than a healthy balance with providing good salaries, good benefits, and bringing in some profit or surplus for their company. If they can get as much money as possible while negating the benefits of the workers, that will happen. This is where trade unions come in, and this is why trade unions
that is absolutely not correct, Brother Grimes. Understand the history. Sorry, I want to interrupt.
Let Mr. Dialli speak.
Let me interrupt you, Brother Grimes. That statement is not correct. Understand the Grenadian history unionism, that we are one of the few countries in the CARICOM that have a thing called profit sharing. And I make no apologies for the capitalists, as you call us, of the employer. Profit is our main core, right?
You are a capitalist for that.
Yeah, and we have people who invest in our company that we have to take returns. But when Grenada, under the revolution, introduced the concept of profit sharing, that is one of the few countries, we are one of the few countries that still maintain that. So what you're saying there is not correct.
And that was trade union driven, Brother Dialli. That was trade union driven.
Yes, and what I'm saying to you is don't say that we are only about profit. We are, but we share it with our workers.
That was trade union driven, profit sharing.
Yeah, it was trade union driven under the revolution.
Yes.
Get it clear. Get it clear.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I just gave you some of the history. Wrong a little more than you.
I just wanted to round up by saying that we here at the Public Workers Union, I don't want people to leave here thinking that our organization is archaic and against modernization and digitization, as the argument is being made now. We are totally on board with that, but we are also on board with workers being treated respectfully and fairly in our economic system. Again, they are not mutually exclusive. So I want that to be, understood by the listeners and viewers, right?
All right. On that note, gentlemen, this was a very important discussion that needs to continue. One of the things I would say in reflecting on preparing for this program, this has been one of the most challenging programs that I've had to produce. And one of the reasons why is because I attempted to reach out to certain workers on contracts to share their experiences, and no one wanted to address that. I also attempted to reach out to some members of the business community to talk about the merits of contract labor for them and the benefits for them. Many folks in the business community who I reached out to also declined to appear. I'm not going to talk about who these people are in the interest of ethics and journalistic ethics, but I would say it is a conversation that needs to continue to happen. And Senator Dialli, I thank you for taking the time, for always being at the beck and call of the Bubb Report, and to have these important discussions. And I certainly welcome you back.
Karana, I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to engage my brother anytime. I know he is he's at a helm. That is going to be a challenge, and I'm happy to be there to help and, of course, provide whatever assistance I can where I can. Thank you again for having me.
All right.
Grimes, it was a pleasure. And again, congrats.
Yes. Mr. Grimes, you as well. Congratulations to you, Mr. Grimes, as well as the newly elected president of the Grenada Public Workers Union. You have some very big shoes to fill, sir.
Yes, I know. So I'd like to thank you once again for the platform, expressing one of the most important things within my tenure, the misuse of contract work. I'd like to thank Brother Dialli for coming on and braving the waters, because many of your contemporaries chose not to. So this discussion needs to be had, and I need a dance partner at times for the conversation to happen, because this show is based on objectivity. So, Brother, continue the good work. To the listeners and viewers, just have a happy Sunday. Enjoy your lunch. Enjoy the rest of the day. And hopefully, I can be back again to speak about the many issues that we face here in labor in Grenada. So thanks once again.
Okay, gentlemen, thank you so much, Senator Dialli. That was Senator Christopher Dialli and Mr. Brian Grimes of the Grenada Public Workers Union. Folks, thank you again for your participation, for your spirited comments. And this has been a very important debate as we look forward to 2021 and beyond. The state of the labor movement, these are some conversations that we will continue to have. And let me just take in some final comments before we go. Brenda Phillip is saying, thanks for this program. I tuned in late for the bits I witnessed, but it was good. Let's keep the dialogue going, relevant to sustainability. Joel Greenidge, great discussion. Cheyenne Date is saying, I enjoyed listening this debate. I hope in the near future, as fast as the candidates vying for the next elections are announced, they will be given a platform to debate the issues facing their constituents and constituencies. Again, that would depend on if the candidates would agree to have that debate. But that is something that we will be doing moving forward as Grenada prepares for another constitutionally due general elections. On behalf of myself, on behalf of the production team here at the Bubb Report, I want to thank you for joining us today. Bye-bye.
So it's not a legal schooling. I know you're sensitive to people schooling you on the law, but I think I can trump you when it comes to the history of Grenada.
What you're saying is that this resignation was expected? Would it be fair to say that you abdicated your responsibility by not showing up in Parliament on Friday?
We are not aware of the terms of the agreement.
But then how can you say the terms are not favorable? You don't know the terms.
We love old talk, we love gossip, we love brango, we love all them kind of things in the Caribbean. If I cannot play music, I don't know how I'm gonna live.
We are borrowing money to pay debt because of corruption, waste, and mismanagement.
That they have difficulty with your leadership. Why then are you contesting the presidency? You've said